everyone, this is Peak Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be my spoiler review of Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Now if you want to check out my non-spoiler review, I will leave the link within the description, and I will also leave the title video at the end of this video as well. Now that was much more of a structured analysis of the film itself, but in this video this is going to be a much more of a freer discussion overall in terms of the standout elements of the overall film. Now this won't necessarily be done in chronological order. I'll just outline what I felt was most standout in terms of this overall film, both in the positive and the negative as well. Now just quickly to recap, in my non-spoiler review I outlined that I thought this was a very good, brisk, entertaining MCU entry. Very much stellar in terms of the fight scenes and the choreography. CGI was good for the most part, and I just think it was let down by the overall final act, which was very much of a CGI overblown mess, and I will talk about that in more detail throughout this video overall. But I genuinely liked all of the actors' performances, and I liked a lot of the origins and backstories that we got, particularly in flashback narratives as well. So overall I thought it was a very entertaining and strong installment within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So final warning now that this is indeed a spoiler review, so if you don't want to be spoiled by the movies and you don't want to be spoiled by the end credit scene, I advise you to go away now, watch the movie, catch up with all the information regarding the end credits, and then come back to this overall review. So here we go then. Now the first element I want to talk about was very much the beginning of the movie, where we got very much of a typical prologue where we see Shang-Chi's father, Munteau, I believe that's his name, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but we've seen the opening scenes where he's gathered very much the 10 rings of power and he's going around conquering the various governments and kingdoms alike, and we go forward to 1996 I believe, and we had that previous action sequence that we saw within the trailer as well, where he's wielding the 10 rings in very spectacular fashion, and it exhibits very much of this blue energy, and he's taken out all of these armies. Now I really liked that. I really liked the way that they visualized the power and the design of the rings, because we were all wondering way back when we first heard of the Mandarin within the first Iron Man film, just how exactly they were going to visualize the 10 rings in terms of their capability and their power structure. Now I thought just having 10 rings, 5 rings on each hand would be fine, but Marvel obviously went to expand that a bit more, and I like the bracelet look. I think most people agree that it's just visually more pleasing, it's just bigger, it's a far more bigger representation of the actual power of the ring, so I liked that. So I just like that opening sequence and then we come on to the next scene where we see that he's searching for some ultimate power, I believe, and they're driving through the forest, and I guess this is them looking for the kingdom Tao Lao, I believe the name is, and this is basically another realm set within Earth. It's this ancient kingdom that's been existing for over 4,000 years, and this is another visually striking moment when the forest kind of comes alive and Shang-Chi's father basically survives by the skin of his teeth as it knocks the van over the forest overall, and then this is where we get that very eloquent fight scene, or more for confrontation between Shang-Chi and Shang-Chi's mother, and we get the typical tones as what I mentioned in my non-spoiler review of all of those Asian classics, House of Flying Daggers, Crouching Tiger and Hidden Dragon and Hero, and it was really House of Flying Daggers that this sequence reminded me of most. It was less of a fight and more of a dance, and to be honest, when you're watching this for the first time, you're kind of wondering where exactly the tone that they're going for, because both of them seem intent that they're going to have this really intense kind of fight confrontation, and then all of a sudden everything is slow motion down and we're getting those overhead shots, and then we see them air bending and weaving in and out of the ground. We get those slow motion shots of Shang-Chi's father and his face looking at her. So this is very much more of a cordial meeting between the two, and she gets the best of him. It was just very well put together, and it was very aesthetically very strong. We have those bright, like I said, bamboo shoots kind of environment on here, and it just looked very visually pleasing on the eye, and just reminiscent again of those Asian classics from yesteryear. So this is again where we get the further developments of them starting a family together, falling in love, giving birth to Shang-Chi, and then we have that very touching scene when the mother basically states that she wants to leave Tao Lao, and that was hinted very much through the actual tragic backstory that she wanted to leave Tao Lao, but the elders wouldn't let her leave. So I guess the father took some retribution towards the Tao Lao inhabitants through his power of the 10 rings, and that was where we very much got the tragedy and the revenge angle within the storyline as well. So I just felt the flashbacks were very nicely done throughout the overall movie. You know, we were getting these little pockets of information because I guess they didn't want the pace to slow by having too much of that heavy-handed tragic backstory, as we were getting all the light-hearted fight sequences and action set pieces as well. So I think that was subtly done by Marvel, and I think it worked overall for the most part of the movie. We then come on to the next standout moment, and I think this will be most people's list when talking about this movie, and that is of course the bus chase encounter. And this is when we've got to know Shang Chi and Katie, and the fact that they're living life to the fullest, so to speak, and they're just partying around and having karaoke, and they've struck very much that friendly bond between them, and I'm glad that they maintained that throughout the movie. It never got too romantic or sexual, and I think that was the right way to play the overall dynamic. But yeah, the bus chase sequence was, for the most part, extremely fantastic. We had those typical Jackie Chan maneuvers where we see Shang-Chi throwing all of those hundreds of punches amongst all of the assassins, and he's throwing them in and out of the window and somersaulting as everybody is looking around him. We had that funny moment when the guy is just filming it on his iPod and giving overall commentary, so that was a nice way to just break amongst the overall action and tone as well. So yeah, I thought this action sequence was pretty much amazing. There were a few little droplets where you could just notice that it was a bit CGI, and again, that was just the rapid fire pace of this sequence. And to be fair, something like this, they're not going to do it 100% realistically, are they? They're going to have to use CGI for the certain maneuvers, the somersaults and angles that Shang-Chi was hitting them all at. So I didn't mind that as much. It wasn't too obvious, and I think overall it was very coherent. It matched very well with the tone of the music. Again, they were going for this very much of this hip-hop music, and that was playing right throughout the overall film itself. The next scene I want to comment about was the first couple of flashbacks where we see Shang-Chi and his sister. We get the first couple of backstories where they're at a young age, and then we see that Shang-Chi is being trained by his father because his father obviously wants him to take over the 10 rings, but the sister is getting left out and she's having to train on her own. And I don't believe they really explained why that was the case, because common sense, you'd want kind of both your son and daughter to be trained in the martial arts, just in case something happens to one another, then someone else is around to continue the legacy of the 10 rings, right? But they didn't really explain too much why she's left on her own, and then she had to train the maneuvers herself. Now that was a bit of a stretch in credibility, because if you see all of the techniques that Shang-Chi is learning and he's being taught by his father, yet she's somehow able to learn it on her own. So again, some people may pick on that. They may feel, again, that's kind of pandering in terms of the feminism. Maybe they're trying to big up the woman because she's able to do it on her own, whereas the male character needed training. And of course we go into the next scene where they go onto the Golden Daggers fight club where he's looking for his sister, and of course we refer to what we saw in the second trailer where we saw the fight scene between Wong and Abomination, and everybody pointed out because Abomination, now they've redesigned his look, he's far more closer in terms of his overall design to the comic book. He's got the fins on his head and his ears as well. But this for me was a bit disappointing because there was a lot of hype and attention brought to this overall encounter between Wong and Abomination, but it didn't mean anything. It literally lasts about 30 seconds. Abomination throws a couple of punches and Wong designs some portals, so when Abomination punches go to hit him, they come back and they hit Abomination, and then he knocks him out, and then that's it. And another weird thing that I noticed was that Wong was training the Abomination. Like, how did that happen? You know, at the end of the Incredible Hulk movie from 2008, Abomination is captured. If you remember, he's apprehended after that brutal fight against the Hulk. So how the hell did he hook up with Wong, and why is Wong training him? You know, it would have been nice to have some sort of exposition. Okay, maybe that would have got in the way with the overall movie itself, because it is meant to be about Shang-Chi, but then you do wonder why have that cameo. It's not really going to mean anything in the long run. So it just would have been a nice, and would have had some sort of connectivity if they just made some sort of reference as to why Wong is fighting Abomination, and why is he training, why is he taking him back to whatever training spot they're going to. So I just thought that was a bit weird, but it was such a short scene, it really didn't matter. And then we get a good fight sequence again where we see Shang-Chi fighting his sister in the cage. And again, some very good fight choreography here. We have that very cool shot where Shang Chi gets flipped down and then he flips back up again, and then he's trying to convince her not to fight, because the overall story arc in this first couple of stages of the film is that the father is after the two necklaces, the green necklaces that both Shang-Chi and his sister had as well. And then we quickly get another flashback scene again where it involves her as well, training as well, and then she knocks him out and then takes him back to the club where she reveals that she actually owns it overall. So just nice flashbacks. And just quickly, falling off from all of the controversy regarding the Cowboy Bebop live action Netflix anime adaptation, we've had all of the fallout, of course, of the actress who plays Faye, Danielle Panaba, making her comments as well. But did you notice that the actress who plays Shang-Chi's sister actually looks a lot like Faye? If you notice, her hairstyle was a lot longer. She had obviously the same look as what Faye does from the anime. And I was looking at her and I was thinking, if you put her in the original costume, she would look like Faye, and she would actually look a lot more like Faye than what Danielle would, right? She just had that stature, and not only that, she had the same attitude and streetwise nature of Faye from Cowboy Bebop as well. So I just noticed that. I wonder if anybody else will pick up on that. The 10 Rings assassins, they break into the fight club, and then Shang-Chi is trying to escape by walking on the building scaffolding. Again, we saw this scenes in the trailer, and again, it's another well executed sequence when he swing along the bars and he's kicking everybody and they're falling down and he's having to save Katie at the same time. And I thought Awkafina was a very good comic presence throughout the movie. They just got the tone right, where she was making all of these observations, she was making all of these quips, but she wasn't getting away in the overall action sequences overall. And I think when you have a character like that, you have to judge it just right, because otherwise it can get annoying and you can be made to hate that character. But I think it was very well played by Awkafina in the role. But I just love this sequence as well. Again, very inventive, very Jackie Chan-esque as well. And you see Shang-Chi moving about everywhere, doing all of these maneuvers, and then his sister joins in as well. There's that one sequence where I think she knocks somebody off the scaffolding and they fall down, and she makes that remark that is he going soft or not. So that's very good overall. And then they managed to get the necklace from her as well. So just another very standout sequence throughout this film as well. Probably along with the bus encounter, the two best fighting sequence throughout this movie. And then we did get another good fight scene again, because at this time the movie's piling the pace, where he fights one of the main assassins that was training him. From the trailers, if you remember, the assassins in that kind of that blue kind of white mask, and that was a very good fight sequence. The pace of the punches and the kicks, very frenetic, very fast, but it was still very seamless, very cohesive. You could always make out what was going on. They never used shaky cam in this movie, which I'm so happy about. I really hate shaky cam, you know, the overuse of it. You're just trying to compensate for the movements of the actors. And yeah, like I said in my non-spoiler review, I believe this is some of the best fight choreography we've seen with the MCU since Winter Soldier. So that was very good. And then of course we have that confrontation where Shang-Chi's father blocks him with the 10 rings, and then that's when they come together, and then he tells him about the 10 Rings organization. Now there was another humorous line when the father mentions the Mandarin and the fact that the actor, I think it's Ian Slattery or Dan Slattery, if you remember from that awful appearance within Iron Man 3, and he basically joked around saying that he's got actors using the Mandarin title in order to incite terror amongst the world, kind of poking fun at that and realising overall that Marvel did make a major mistake with that inclusion of the Mandarin overall. But very nice line in humour. And then we get another flashback where we see the father and mother getting married and when they had a family, and I just like the performance of that. And this is when the movie was really carrying some emotional weight within these flashbacks. And then we get this very stunning sequence when the father puts the two pendants into the eyes of the dragon, and then we get that huge explosion of water. Again, we see that from the trailer. Again, very reminiscent of certain scenes of Hero, if you've seen that film. And we had some great effects where we see the water covering over the map to the Tao Lao Kingdom. That was very good on there as well. I like that a lot. So again, very good in terms of the visual effects and aesthetic throughout this movie. And then the father reveals kind of the tragic backstory, and that he's hearing her voices and that the mother is calling back to him, and this is part of his big plan, is that he wants to go back to Tao Lao because he feels that's where the mother is. So this is really where we were getting a lot of empathy and sympathy with this villain overall, because despite the fact that he's conquered all of these kingdoms, he wasn't really out to destroy the world. He just wanted to reconnect with his wife. So we can understand that motivation. This is where the actor Tony Leung really brought a lot of sensitivity and gravitas to his overall performance. Now, one question I did want to ask is that if all he wanted was the green necklaces in order to find out the map to the Tao Lao kingdom, then why didn't he just ask Shang Chi and his sister? Why did he have to send the 10 rings out to try and basically beat them and assassinate them? Now, he did refer to this earlier on within the movie where it was almost like a test, where he basically says, I told them that they would not be able to kill you. I was glad that I was proven right. But what if they killed him? Or what if he had lost the necklaces? What if he had dropped him down a building, or they got smashed during the fight sequences? Then he would have been able to obtain what he needed in order to find his wife, right? So that was one thing that was bothering me. It's like, why didn't you just ask them? I'm pretty sure they would have been understanding if you just said that you basically just wanted to look for your wife, right? They would have gladly handed over the necklaces to you. So that was just a bit of a nitpick that I was running through my brain when I was watching this movie. Now, one criticism that I had throughout the story, that for all of the good flashbacks and for all of the established motivation between Shang-Chi's father and what he was trying to do, I didn't feel that they emphasised that quite enough. I think we could have done with more scenes of him having visions of his wife. We got a few glimpses here and there, but I would have preferred far more intense sequences of him having his wife calling out to him, and we really got to understand the overall desire and how this has very much clouded his overall judgment, because the overall story was that the darker forces that had been conquered in previous lifetimes within the Tao Lao kingdom were resurfacing themselves again, and because he had the power of the 10 rings, they were calling out to him. And I wanted a much more visualization of that. We had that sequence where they visit Tao Lao kingdom and Michelle Yeoh was talking to them, and she's basically giving the exposition and she's showing all of the statues. And I think they did something similar, I believe it was either the first or the second Wonder Woman, when they were explaining something, but they didn't actually show us the overall event. They just showed it for all of these statues. And I was watching that sequence, I was thinking, I wanted to see that event. I would have quite happily had an extended prologue sequence where we saw the darker forces and how they were taking over the kingdom, and we had the one big protector, which I believe turned out to be Fin Fang Foom in that big sequence near the end of the movie. But I wanted to see that whole backstory, because I'm very much a fan of seeing the whole mythology and how it plays out, because I just think it gives further context about the movie and the overall story. So that was a bit disappointing to me, that they just gave that overall exposition without talking about the actual, or without actually showing the events within the overall battle of the darkness, or the darkness dwellers, I believe they were called. And then we had, for me, probably the darkest moment of the whole film, when the gang show up. I think it's the Iron Gang show up as the mother is training both Shang-Chi and his sister, and they're basically saying that someone has to pay for the father's deed. So I'm guessing when he's going around conquering all of these kingdoms with his 10 rings, he's obviously crossed the wrong people, and that somebody has to pay. And I think Marvel were trying to be very careful here, because I know plenty of films that would have just had them sweep in, kill the mother and kill the children as well. But they wanted to be very careful, because again, this is very much of a family friendly orientated franchise, of course. And I just feel, because again, you're trying to appeal to Eastern audiences, you want to try and showcase the demographic in a good light. They didn't want to make it overly cruel, so they have it where they say they agree to let the children go, and then the mother goes on to fight all of the gang, and tensions really build up, because we see more and more of them. There ends up must be about 15 to 20 of them at least, all taking on the singular mother. And this was because, of course, at the time she was in the Tao Lao kingdom, she had all of those powers, because remember, she was able to best Shang-Chi's father himself, right? So that's why they gathered so many people. And this is where, for me, in an ideal world, we would have seen this in an extensive fight sequence, right? We would have seen her taking on all of these gangs, and she would have beaten them up, but slowly we see more and more coming after her, and then she gets exhausted, and then she gets weakened, and then she gets killed. So I'm not saying there had to be this graphic sequence where we see her getting stabbed, but that is a sequence that we should have seen played out. And I think Marvel, they kind of just scared away from that moment, because again, it was the perception, I guess, of multiple men surrounding and beating down on a woman. I guess you know, they felt that was too far, and they were probably a bit wary of the backlash if they had a sequence like that. But I think in terms of the overall movie, it would have given it so much weight, so much more tragedy, and really emphasised, I think, the overall motivations between the father and why he was striving so hard to fight for his wife. But this is really the strong segment of the movie in terms of the storytelling, because we get that whole revenge sequence played out, and then we get the next sequence when Shang-Chi's father walks with him into this old restaurant. Again, this is a sequence that we saw in the trailers, and then he talks about a blood debt must be paid by blood, and then the child stands there, and we see Shang-Chi's father just go in there and he takes out all of the men, and there's no real intense music as such. He's just taking them all out and he's throwing them against the window, he's throwing them against the wall, and it's really dark and intense, again, for an MCU movie. And I like that, because again, it's just ramping up the tension, and it's just giving that far more suspense and adding a lot more seriousness to the overall tone of the movie. And this was very well acted by the child actor. I don't know who was playing the child Shang-Chi at the time, but very good, where we see his eyes and his visions. And again, he's already gone through the experience of seeing his mum being killed, and then he's seen his father taking out these violent acts. So they played this sequence very, very well, and again, you were very gripped at this point overall. And then this is when we go on to the further development, where we see that Shang-Chi was sent with the task of killing the man that was responsible for sending those men to kill his mother, because that wasn't within the gang, within the group. Now, in the beginning, it was implied that Shang-Chi had turned this challenge down, and that's why he ran away from his father. But it actually turns out later on we've seen that Shang-Chi did kill the man responsible. This is the second time that Marvel really kind of cowered away from showing its development. Again, probably not wanting to show an Asian man taking overall vengeance by stabbing someone. I think the fact that because Shang-Chi was at a young age, and that's why they were able to show his father taking revenge, but not Shang-Chi. That was something we really needed to see, and that would have just given it so much more impact overall, in terms of really adding depth and weight to the character, and really making the motivation better as to why Shang-Chi ran away. Because you just think Shang-Chi's a coward, he just couldn't handle responsibility. But if you added that development before, where we saw that he actually killed the man, then that, going through that experience with the previous experience of seeing his mum died as well, that would have been the tipping point and made Shang-Chi run away from his father, and that would have made far more sense as well. So again, I think Marvel just dropped the ball in terms of not showing that overall sequence. And then the next standout moment was the Ben Kingsley cameo. Again, he's played for laughs. I didn't mind this too much. I'd rather him in this capacity than actually being one of the most iconic antagonists of Iron Man and then just being turned out to make a joke. And he just makes reference to the fact that he's an actor, and basically he was going to get killed for playing the Mandarin overall after he got arrested, but for some reason they felt that his acting skills were so good that they kept him around, and he was able to go all over the world and really kind of imposter different people. I didn't really buy that as such. Again, this whole sequence you could have taken out. You didn't really need Ben Kingsley in it, as much as he was good, and in the cinema a lot of people were laughing at him throughout the film, so it did add a lot more comic relief. But this was whole unnecessary. They could have found other ways to find the route back to the Tao Lao kingdom. And then he has this other pet with hasn't got a face as well. Again, it wasn't bad, it didn't drag the film down, but I just felt it wasn't necessary, and it just ate up a bit of screen time that once again we could have spent with far more intense and far more impactful scenes throughout the movie. So then we go on to the overall final battle, where basically they've gone to the Tao Lao kingdom, they've met Michelle Yeoh, she's given the exposition about the darkness dwellers, and we have some nice little montages where we see them training. We see Shang-Chi's sister using that spear to take out this certain targets. We see Awkafina getting used to the arrows, she's getting taught how to shoot them. Shang-Chi gets his armor as well. I wasn't a massive fan of the armor, and again, this is something that put me off in the terms of the overall trailers when I saw them for the first time, because Shang-Chi doesn't look as good in live action. If you look at the comic book interpretations and the design of the character, it looks far better than what the live action was. So hopefully if we get a sequel, or if Shang-Chi makes further appearances later on down the line of the MC, they can just bolster up that costume a bit more and just get it closer to the overall comic book look. Just give it much more of a dynamic and vibrant look about it. But then we get the immersion of the 10 Rings organizations. They turn up in all of these big massive SUVs and then against the villagers, and then we see these wildebeest and monsters as well fighting alongside them. And this is where I felt the battle wasn't quite set up right. It just didn't quite have that delivery. You know, just questioning the motivation of the father. He's willing to destroy the whole village just to get to his wife. But then the battle ensues, and this is when the movie was starting to lose itself a bit, because all the villagers are fighting, and fair enough, everybody's pirouetting and shooting arrows and taking them down, and that's very good. But then we come to the next bit where the father is really losing control of himself, and then he has an eventual fight sequence against Shang-Chi. And one thing I queried as well is that how is Shang-Chi able to kind of repel the power of the 10 Rings? Now I can understand if he was fighting his father one-on-one, but his father is very extremely powerful still. There's no signs of him aging or depreciating, so Shang-Chi shouldn't be able to fend off all of the rings, you know, single-handedly on his own. Yes, he has this spear to begin with, but the father kind of disarms him from that. So I just kept wondering, how does Shang-Chi able to just repel the power of the rings? His father's been so powerful throughout many of the centuries. And then he's kind of beaten, or he's evaded from Shang-Chi. He pushes him into the water again. We get those last shots of the CGI where Shang-Chi drowns down, and then the father elevates himself to the wall. He's punching through the wall when the voices are calling him out, and this is when the movie starts to get overblown in its CGI climax, because all of a sudden we see all of these smaller dragons popping out from the wall. This is again the darkness dwellers, and they're all coming out and they're all assaulting the villagers. They're taking their spirit from them. We see them grabbing a couple of the characters as well. We had that funny moment when Razor Fist still states that he wants to fight them, and then he nearly gets his spirit assimilated, and then Michelle Yeoh disables him, and then he basically says, no, we will fight with you. So that was a very funny line. But then we had that underwater scene when Shang-Chi comes up against Fin Fan Foom. I assume they never called him by name, but I feel this was the movie's representation of that character. And then he swoops up from the water, and then he's eating up all of the other smaller dragons. And again, it's all done just too quick, too haphazard, and you've got this big swirling dragon all over the place. Shang-Chi's riding him, and yeah, this is where we get a few weaker shots in terms of the CGI, bit unconvincing, and everything moving at 100 miles an hour at this point. Shang-Chi jumps back off, he fights his father again, a bit anticlimactic because we've already seen them fight off previously. He manages to attain the rings from him. Again, how he's doing this I don't know, and they turn from blue to yellow just to fit in with the color scheme of Shang-Chi. And then the big dragon emerges from the wall, and then he sucks the spirit from Shang-Chi's father, essentially killing him. So we get that slow motion look between the two of them. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, I think another dragon appears when I think it's his sister is riding the dragon, and she fights the main destructor dragon. Again, at this point I'm kind of rolling my eyes because we've got 2 or 3 dragons and they're all flying around. One of them died, I think, having their spirit sucked into them, and then we get all of these yellow and blue and energy and purple glows as Awkafina is shooting the arrow at the throw, and then his sister is also throwing these spears at them. And again, there's just no coordination. It's too chaotic, it's too messy. You can barely make out what was going on, and it was losing me. I have to admit, the movie was losing me at this point. All of the tension and suspense that we had previously throughout the smaller scale encounters was now gone, and this is Marvel going in their typical rushed third act action mode CGI spectacle. We had the same issues, of course, if you remember, with Black Panther. That was another story that didn't merit a whole CGI overblown mess. So this is where the movie was letting down, and even more so than previous movies. I actually was marking the movie down at this point. I was kind of hovering around close to an 8, but this whole climax just, I had to take it down a couple of notches because it was just dragging on. It must have gone on for a good 25-30 minutes roundabout, and it was just devoid of any tension or excitement, and you're almost clock watching this point. You're kind of, okay, let's just get to the end. Shang-Chi basically jumps on the dragon, he uses his ring, he basically shoots an energy projectile into the dragon, and he basically disarms him. He's running around, climbing over him, sliding under him. Again, you're getting everything at these multiple angles and shots, so I was kind of whatever at this point. Just beat the dragon and let's just end this overall. And then we get a nice funeral scene when everybody's defeated, and we have everybody sitting by the lake. We have those little yellow lanterns sailing across the water. It's a bit reminiscent, if you remember, of the funeral scene that we had for the Dark World. That was one of the best parts of that movie. And we see the Fing Fang Foom dragon just flying away into the sky. Very good visuals, very good spectacle as well. So just a nice way to round up the overall tone of the movie. Again, I would have preferred a smaller, more emotional climax with the father. Would have meant more impact, but there you go. And then we end back at the dinner, and this is in reference to an earlier scene where we had Shang Chi and Katie, and they were talking to their good friends. In that previous scene, they were talking about their lives and how good they were having it, drinking, partying, and how, you know, their parents were annoying them, trying to tell them to get serious. But now, of course, they were retelling the whole events of the epic battle. And this is very funny because their friends are not buying it. They're not believing it at all. And this is actually what happened. And then Wong shows up at the end through his portal, and then he takes the two away. He's got something to tell them. And that's essentially when the movie ends. And then we come on to the 2 edit credit sequences. Now, when I read previous reviews, everybody was ranting and raving how exciting the end credit scenes were, especially the first one, but I didn't get it. So basically what it is, Wong has taken Shang-Chi and Katie to the Sanctum because they're explaining the origin of the 10 rings. They want to know where they come from. There was references that despite the fact that Shang-Chi's father was carrying them around for 1,000 years, the rings themselves are actually much older than that. So they're explaining the origins of that, and then for some reason they're talking to both Captain Marvel and Bruce Banner, and basically they're trying to determine the origins of the rings, and they have no idea what they are basically. Now, you would have thought that the one person to ask about the origin of the rings would have been Doctor Strange, right? What is Captain Marvel going to know about the rings? You know, she's barely been on Earth. She's been away on other planets, right? She's not going to have a clue about what these rings are. Now, maybe Bruce Banner might have been carrying out some sort of scientific analysis, trying to recalibrate the energy source, but again, I just felt you didn't really need these two, so I didn't get what was so special about it. I have a cynical feeling this is more about promoting the up-and-coming shows, because as we all know, Captain Marvel will make some appearance, I'm sure, in the Miss Marvel Disney Plus shows, and we all know that Mark Ruffalo is going to appear in the She-Hulk television show as well. So that's what I think this end credit was. I think it was just Marvel doing some promotion for the up-and-coming Disney Plus shows. There was an interesting element when they talked about the element within the rings, and I don't know, at first I thought it was an Infinity Stone, but I think it was some sort of energy source. Maybe it was referring to the multiverse, and I think they talked about something about a message and an overall beacon that this signal was sending out. So that was the best interesting element of this end credit sequence. Maybe we'll get some sort of reference when we go into Spider-Man No Way Home, of course. We might get some reference to Eternals, I'm pretty sure, in the end credit scene, but we will wait and see how that plays out overall. So this was a mildly interesting end credit scene. It wasn't mind-blowing as what many critics were making out. And then we get the final end credit scene where essentially we see that Shang-Chi's sister has now taken over the 10 rings. Again, I felt it would have been more convincing if Michelle Yeoh had taken over the 10 Rings organization, because she's just too young. Okay, she's had her training as such, but maybe because she's the next in line in terms of the hair, of course, and Shang-Chi has gone on this quest with Katie as well. So maybe it made sense as sort of continuity, but overall I think it would have made far more sense if Michelle Yeoh had taken over the organisation. But again, that doesn't mean anything unless we get reference to a sequel in Shang-Chi, and I'm pretty sure the sister will be making an appearance, maybe in certain Disney Plus shows as well, whether it's Ironheart or Armored Wars later on down the line, maybe Secret Invasion as well. We will wait and see everyone. But that end credit scene didn't mean anything at all. Again, you could have had that as one of the overall scenes closing out the film, and it wouldn't have made any difference overall. So that's it really. That's my overall spoiler review of Shang-Chi and the Legends of the Ten Rings. Those are overall the main elements that I pointed out within the movie. But if there were elements that you think I've missed out, any Easter eggs or any references that you feel I haven't included within this review, let me know in the comments, and if needed I can make an additional video and we can talk about those at further length as well. Please also hit and like those subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content and reviews like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.